Welcome to the House of Truth. Today we'll wrap up our series on after Joshua. Those events, those events from the death of Joshua until the first judge arises in the book of Judges. And there's some overlap starting with the time Joshua, well, there's some background from the time of Moses, but some overlap from the time when Joshua divided the promised land all the way to well in the future, beyond when the first judge appeared. And we'll look at some of those events that are brought up in the narrative for us in sort of a flashback and flash forward fashion at times. We're going to begin here with the foundation here from Exodus 23, 31 through 33, where God is laying out the plan to Israel, this covenant about giving the promised land, what he's going to do to make this possible, and what their part is to do. Okay, so first of all, we begin in verse 31 with this. And again, Exodus 23, verse 31 through 33. And I'll set your bounds to the Red Sea, to the Sea of the Philistines, from the desert to the mountain, for I'll deliver the inhabitants of the land to your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them with their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. If you serve their gods, it'll surely be a snare unto you. Okay, so they're gonna have this land from the Red Sea to the Sea of the Philistines, in the desert, the river, meaning the Euphrates River, and he's gonna drive them out. Now, a little picture might help. You can't quite see the Red Sea, but this is kind of roughly it. This is the coast of the Philistines, where their 5 cities were. Down here's the Red Sea. If you remember this here goes straight down to the Red Sea, and you remember on this side and over belonged to Esau and Edom. But that side, on the other side, when they were on this side, they didn't cross. So it goes down kind of where Lot is today, down there, but perhaps a little bit to the east of it's their side, their part. Lot was actually listed as belonging to the descendants of Esau. Okay, so and here's this. It's called the Sea of the Philistines in this passage, because there's the Philistines. So let's give you this ideal, this branch here, and there's the brook of Egypt we've talked about before. It divides the border of Egypt being got the misnamed Sinai Peninsula shown here. Then what's and in the day it's pretty close to what the border is today, as a matter of fact. Now, when it says from the river, there's the Euphrates River. There's part of the Euphrates River. It's going to border, and to the deserts, this desert here, okay, down here. So this part here between these two is what's referred to as the border, the river to the desert. And this whole thing, remind you, is roughly the size of the state of Kentucky. And the shape's not identical, but somewhat similar. If you took Kentucky, rotated it 90 degrees, so its southern border was now its eastern border, then just sort of mentally flipped the whole thing, so that now is on the west side. It'd be very similar in shape, and it's about the same size land-wise, okay, just to give you an idea. But that's what it's referring to there. Now, so he will deliver them, the inhabitants of their land, to their hand. Remember, they're too strong for them. They're too big, and there's more. Not Philistines are not one of them. Remember this: the Canaanites. Philistines are invaders into the Canaanite land. But the Canaanites, there's 7 ethnic groups. Each ethnic group is bigger than Israel, has more people. The people are larger and stronger. And of course, there's 7 of these ethnic groups versus 1 for Israel. So it's an impossible task for them to do on their own. But he doesn't expect them to. He's going to do the heavy lifting, and their part is to mop up behind him. You're going to drive them out from before you. He's going to deliver them into your hands, like we saw in Jericho when the walls fell down. And then they're to drive them out from before you. So they're going to do the part they can do, and he's going to take care of the part they cannot do. But also on their part, they're not to make any covenants with them with their gods. And this expression with their gods is why, so they don't end up serving those gods and then being a snare to them. You're not to let them live in your land. But notice this covenant is a covenant with their gods, not just with them, with their gods. And we saw last time was looking at the remaining inhabitants, how it was okay to come in with Rahab, and the Gibeonites were okay because they both expressed faith in God. And we know from scripture, Rahab by faith hid the spies, faith in God. The covenant, and they swore in the name of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It was a covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, not with their idol gods. But where we ended last on the original inhabitants, we'll look at this again in more detail. They had this precedent of these other two, and they made a covenant without involving God. It was not a covenant with people who turned to God from among these inhabitants, because that's their third option. One, they can stay and be destroyed. Two, they can flee. They can go somewhere else, and the Hittites did. In fact, they built an entire empire in roughly half of Turkey. Kind of went to the middle and kind of went up the middle of half of Turkey. And, and the most famous of their cities was Troy. The famous Trojans were Hittites. Well, the other option, the one rarely taken by Rahab and Gibeon, was to turn to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, come to him in total surrender, and make a covenant with them, not with their gods, but with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So the whole thing is, it's not racism. It's not letting them influence Israel to serve their gods and that ensnare them. Okay, so we continue in Exodus 31, 11 through 16. And we read the following. Observe you that which I command you this day. Behold, I will drive out before you the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. Take heed to yourselves, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land wherever you go, lest there be a snare in the midst of you. We shall destroy their altars, break their images, cut down their groves. For you shall not worship no other God, for the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. You shall make a covenant with, lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they go whoring after their gods, who sacrifice their gods, and call one of you, and one call you and eat of his sacrifices. And you take of their daughters with your sons, and their daughters go whoring with their gods, and make your sons go whoring after their gods. So we see here in verses 11 through 16, again, he will drive them out, and he's going to drive them out through the Melech Adonai, as we've shown before a couple of times. One a lesson called the angel of the Lord, the Melech Adonai, and we also saw that again. We looked at the origins of the Lamb, what the Lamb of God was doing before his birth, and here's what we see. He's going to drive them out again, as we mentioned. The Gergesites aren't mentioned here. There's only 6 mentioned here, but that's still, they're perhaps the smallest. They get left out. They get left out occasionally. But notice, it's not just the driving the covenants. You've got to get rid of all their religious worship centers, altars where they made their sacrifices, their gods they worshiped, and their groves, which were sometimes kind of like totem poles, astral pose, and the like, wooden pose with carvings on them. But sometimes they were just literal trees, evergreen trees, particularly like like pine trees and whatever. Like people set up a Christmas evergreens, the same kind of idea. Where they'd literally commit fornication under those trees. So you got to get rid of not just the inhabitants, but all of their religious things. You're not to go, wow, man, that's beautiful art. We can't destroy that. No, you're destroy it completely. As we showed before, it's total smash and burn. We'll go on that again. Because he's not going to let you worship their God, just like I'm not going to let another man have time with my wife in the bedroom. God's not willing to share. And so that's the ideal there. So they go whoring after their gods. And notice, eat of a sacrifice and call you. Remember, even the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, one of the necessary things for the Gentiles was not to eat things offered to idols, because that's like communion. You're having a meal with God, that the bread and the wine representing the blood and the body of Messiah, and you're in communion with God. Okay. Well, when you eat things sacrificed to idols, and you know it, you're in communion with their idols. And then they're going to use their daughters to get you into going after their gods. When does it go a whoring? It means that both in a spiritual sense, playing the whore against God, being an adultery, unfaithful to Him, but also in these worship times they have in these groves, the women may up they get drunk and have sex with whoever, and may or may not be their husband, and their sons get involved in that. And then there's no mention of marriage here. Think back to Baal Peor or the golden calf, okay, type thing. No, so they're involved here, okay, with this business. Again, harlots like Rahab had formerly been, perhaps pressed into service against their will. But regardless, the whole goal is to get them after their gods, to get their worship is the goal of a harlot. It's not, the money is secondary. To get you to worship and get in that system's primary, because then you'll be giving money the rest of your life. Now, we continue on here in Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 through 5. And read the following. When the Lord God shall bring you into the land where you go to possess it, and shall cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord shall deliver them before you, shall smite them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them. Neither shall you make marriage with them. Their daughters shall go not get. Thy daughter shall not give to his son, nor his daughter take to your son. For they will turn away your son from following me, and they may serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you and destroy you suddenly. Thus you shall deal with them. They shall break their altars they shall destroy their altars, break down their images, cut down their groves, and burn their graven images with fire. Okay, as I mentioned, smash and burn. But notice how serious this is. You're not to marry with them either. You're to show them no mercy. Now, this is an important point here. Well, if you'll show someone mercy, why? The other person made an emotional appeal. We are to use sound judgment, sober judgment, the Bible says, meaning we don't consider emotions at all. We consider the facts, the evidence, the circumstances only. Okay? So they're going to plead with you not to kill them, whatever, and you're just to kill them anyways. No matter how much they plead, no matter what kind of sad puppy dog look or whatever they may give you, because it's you or them. Now there's marriage, and see, notice it's going both ways. Your daughter's gonna get involved in the idolatrous system as well. Women keep her cultures in the home, and you give your daughter to his son, she'll want to start getting things good between her and her in-laws, particularly if the son lives near him. If his daughter comes there, he's going to bring that idolatry in with her. So they're going to turn away. So either way, they're going to turn away their children. They're going to serve these other gods. And notice God's going to be against you and destroy you suddenly. You have to carry out this smash and burn, total destruction policy to drive out what the Amalek, remember the Melech the angel of the Lord. Remember, he'll deliver them before you. That's how he's going to deliver them. He's going to take care of what you can't do, and he is going to. You got to drive. It's your job to drive them out. Israel's job. Break, not marry them, not make covenants with them and their gods, and to totally destroy all their worship, their centers of idol worship in the areas you've taken possession of. No, okay. So that's Israel's part, and God's got his part. Now we're reading Joshua 23, verse 5 through 8. We read the following. The Lord your God, and the Lord your God shall expel them from before you, and drive them out from your sight, and you shall possess their land as the Lord your God has promised unto you. Be you therefore very courageous to keep and to do all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, to turn not aside therefrom to the right hand or to the left. And you are not to come you are not to come among these nations that remain among you, nor make mentions of the names of their gods, nor cause them to swear by them, or cause to swear by them, or to swear that serve them, or bow yourselves unto them. But claim the Lord your God as you've done this day. Okay, no, so you're not even to make mention of the name of their gods. Okay. And we understand this means like in the terms of an oath or something. I mean, here in the book of Moses, Baal, one of the names of their gods, is spelled out, and we'll see that here in a soon. Asheroth, another one. But notice it's talking about, knows the connection to swearing, to making oaths, okay? Serving them, bowing yourselves to them. You're not to do any such thing like that. But you're to drive them out and possess your land. You're to do this plan we talked about. We're clear an area, then you go and possess that area. You go in there, and that's it for that generation. You build the population. And the next one will go, as we talked about last time, why there's remaining inhabitants. There's another reason why there's remaining inhabitants as well. Well, notice that remain among you. Okay, so the plant, they're going to remain among them, but you're not to. But they're they're over their fortified city or whatever. You're over here in the farmland, and you don't engage in business with them, anything, because the goal is the next phase to take them out. Now therefore, fear in Joshua 24, verses 16 through 14, 16, Joshua continues his warning here in his final speech before he dies about what Moses said, how serious this business is. Now therefore, fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and truth, and put away the gods your fathers served on the other side of the flood and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it seem evil that you serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve. Where the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He'll answer and said, God forbid that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. Okay, so Joshua urged them to do this. And I want you to bring this to your attention here. put away the gods which your father served on the other side of the flood. That means the Euphrates River and Egypt. Now, notice the fact he says put away. That's like divorce. That term's also used as divorce. And this indicates there's a problem even before Joshua dies among that, not that generation who came with him and possessing it, but with that generation that follows that's growing up, that's been growing up since he completed his wars and sitting here. And it's like, remember, Rachel had stolen her father's god, little like maybe a little teraphim figure, maybe 6 inches tall. She's sitting on top and he couldn't see it, so it could have been huge, but it was probably terracotta. That was very common back in those days. And then later, Jacob had to put the gods out of his camp, the foreign gods out of his camp. Well, the same thing's repeating here. This younger generation, not the gods of the Canaan, of the Amorites, right here that they're at. They've got the gods from over before the flood even. They got them perhaps through trade and in Egypt. And remember, we saw a problem where they were making sacrifices to God, other gods in the wilderness, that generation that died in the wilderness, even with the even under the light of the pillar by cloud and fire by night. So there's been definitely opportunity for them to get up and notice. But now these gods of the Amorites, those gods we just talked about. But Joshua and his house are going to serve the Lord. And this part, but as for me and my house will serve the Lord. People often quote this part, just the last part of this part. But the context is as opposed to other gods. And notice the people answer. Notice the people, that means, that Joshua, that generation Joshua led in there, and the younger generation, perhaps the generation of that, they're definitely old enough, a lot of them, to be grandfathers. The oldest ones, when they came into the promised land, would have been 57 years old. The youngest were 20. And some times passed by here. We're not real how long, but 7 years they divided it in some time. But let's say it's 20 more years. Some of them are 77 now, and those youngest ones are 40. Okay, definitely have children, grandchildren, and they've been doing this and they're already in indications. They're already leaning towards this idolatry that they've been warned not to do. Now, Joshua continues on in Joshua 24, in his speech, in his farewell speech before he dies, with these words, verses 20 through 24. If you forsake the Lord and serve strange gods, and he will turn and do you hurt and consume you after he's done you good. And the people said, Joshua, nay, we'll serve the Lord. Joshua said to the people, you are a witness against yourself. You've chosen the Lord to serve him. They said, we are witnesses. Now, therefore, put away the strange gods which are among you, and incline your heart unto the Lord your God. The people said to Joshua, the Lord our God we will serve, and this his voice we will obey. Notice again, the strange gods. God is going to turn around and do them hurt if they don't follow through. So remember, so basically, remember, in the areas that they take possession of, they destroy everything associated with that religion. They drive out the Canaanites completely from those areas. There's going to be other ones that can't drive out because it's generation to generation, as we saw last week. So they can drive out the wild animals and sell the land, build new farms, so the next generation of Israelites can take those over and repeat process. Okay. But they're not to have any dealings with them, not to marry them. Keep away from them. Separate yourself from them completely. And if they don't, they're going to end up serving these strange gods, and God will will do them harm, just like he said he would do to the others. Okay. So there's our warnings here. Now we're going to take a little look at how they did. And I want to remind you before we do that, before we look at that, about what Joshua had taken. It's a little hard to see on this map, but here's Hermon up here. Manasseh already had this east side. Here, I think perhaps the third map will do us a little better. And Joshua took basically a swath of land, kind of went this direction, across this way. He had much lands left to remain, about maybe 10, 20 miles wide across here. And then across near the Jordan River, because they already had the possession of the land here on the east side, that bordered it all the way up to Hermon, which is a little off, kind of off the map here, okay? And he'd done that. So now what we had, the Canaanites are divided. Some are in the south, along with the Philistines. Some, it took some of this area, and there's that promise of Judah. You help me with my area up here, I'll help you with yours down here. Remember, there's not a big swath of land like it shows here. Simeon doesn't have any farmlands. They have a bunch of cities dotted. Some of those belong actually to the Levites. And they got the little villages right outside the cities, and that's it. The farmland actually all belongs to Judah. This should be a bunch of polka dots, okay? In reality. Well, so that's kind of what they took. That's kind of what they took, and they divide the land. And it's each one's responsibility to go in there and go in there and start selling what they've already taken possession of, and get ready for the next generation to get the next step, okay? But they're cut off, and they're cut off this way so Israel can squeeze them this way, push them out, and push them down this way into Edom or into Egypt. And they can't help each other because the Israelites are too strong in the middle if they'll follow God's plan. They give them peace and security. There was a problem with it, if you remember, and that was Joshua had said why are you slack, why are you being lazy? They want to keep hanging out, first of all, kind of an urban mindset. They've been in this camp, as we showed before, it's cross-shaped, literally cross-shaped camp. They've been in this camp for some of them's entire life, for 40, maybe 60 years. And now to get out, it's basically a mobile city. And now to get out of that city and go out there and become farmers or move into these other cities and not have the sense of security you will get from numbers, strength in numbers, that there's enough people around they're going to protect them or whatever. And they're going to trust God more. And it's going to be a lot more work. Yeah, the farms they plant the vineyards and so on and so forth, but they have to harvest those things, have to maintain them. And if they go into these cities, some of these cities, they damage to various degrees. Some like Jericho, they left as ruinous heaps on purpose. But others, they damaged them, we're told, and they're going to have to repair that damage. It's work. So they had this idea to look for the low-lying fruit. And in some cases, the Lord wasn't with them, wasn't driving them out because he said he wasn't going to drive them all out. Some cases, they kind of fell in the middle, kind of did partly. Remember, they were supposed to turn to the left or the right, not to make any adjustments to God's plan. And some they just utterly, it was total laziness, or perhaps even a sense of adventure that drove them not to follow the plan. But it gets worse, as I said. This laziness is ultimately combined with greed, and it's going to get worse, as we're going to look at now that we're in Joshua 16, verses 8 through 10. The border went from, this is Ephraim. Okay. The border went from Tappuah westward and the river Cana, and the goings out there were at the sea. This there is the children of Ephraim by their families. And the separate cities for Ephraim were among the inheritance of the children of Manasseh, all the cities of their villages. They drove out not the Canaanites who dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwell among the Ephraimites into this day and serve under tribute. Okay, remember, this was compiled. As it went along, they kept records and they compiled it later. So as the time of when the compilation, the Canaanites are still there. Well, there's a number of problems here. Notice the separate cities were among the inheritance of the children of Manasseh. Ephraim did not stay in their own area. They went to go take occupation of ones in Manasseh's area. And Manasseh, we saw, if you remember, kind of took the farmland around some of their cities. Okay, they're not following the plan at all there. They're going for the low-lying fruit. If you have a fruit tree, maybe if it's pretty big, maybe the first 20% you can kind of reach up and grab pretty easily. That takes a lot more effort to get the rest. Well, and so people are just going for the bottoms, called grabbing the low-lying fruit, and that's what they're doing here. So notice it's supposed to go out. We're at the sea, and that sea westward of the river Kana. That's the west side, and the going out of this river was at the sea. Okay, to make that plain. Now, but notice this. But there's the biggest problem. The case dwelt among them. Well, okay, God's going to drive them all at once. But notice this was ones they were supposed to drive out. They drove them not out. Not the Lord wasn't with them, and the Canaanites, and they could not overcome the Canaanites, like we saw, because it wasn't time for them to drive them out. But these were ones they're supposed to drive out in Gezer. And what they did, instead of driving them out and then having all this work, is they put them on, they made a covenant with them. That's how you get someone to distribute. You make an agreement with them to pay you. Now, this is laziness and greed. Money is stored labor, if you think about it. Like back in the day, they worked all day for a piece of silver that weighed I don't know, half a gram or whatever it may have been. Now, or whatever it may have been. Let's say it's 40 grams. They work all day for this piece of silver, and then that silver represents that days of labor. Okay, so now the Canaanites are doing the labor, creating the money, or the services. Perhaps they're paying as tribute goods if they don't have money. Perhaps they say so many sheep a year, or whatever the case is. It's not uncommon. Well, this is money for nothing to the Ephraimites. They think this is a good plan. The problem is it's not God's plan. Now, to give you an idea here, here's Ephraim, and we'll talk about how before this is not quite right. But here's Tapua, and it kind of gives you an idea. They're going into these other guys in the West Manasseh's property and taking some land here that doesn't belong to them. I mean, some cities, because they were easier to get to. And West Manasseh took some property around some farmland around some of their cities, let them deal with the city dwellers, because it was again both cases the low-lying fruit. Well, this starts with Ephraim. Remember, Judah there's two big strong. There's two tribes that are kind of leaders. Ephraim's one, and Manasseh's the other. I mean, and Judah's the other. And when the kingdoms divide, Shechem, which later becomes Samaria, is up here in Ephraim, okay? In this area here, okay? So they got this. So this is what they're doing here. Well, now we're continue on here in Joshua 17. This is while Joshua, remember, this is during that period between Joshua, after he divided the land. And we'll look at exactly when this tribute business starts, because it actually gives us an ideal here. But afterwards, they do this. Now, let's go read about Manasseh. Manasseh is going to carry out Ephraim's same policies against other tribes as well. Again, going for that low-lying fruit. Here's what we read in Joshua 17, verse 11 through 13. And Manasseh had Issachar, and in Issachar and in Asher, Beth Shean and her towns, Ibleam and her towns, the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, the inhabitants of Endor and her towns, the inhabitants of Taanach and her towns, and the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, even 3 countries. Yet the children of Manasseh could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities. The Canaanites would dwell in that land. Yet it came to pass, when the children of Israel were waxed strong, that for the Canaanites tribute, but did not early drive them out. Okay, notice that Manasseh had in where? Their own land? No, Issachar and Asher's allotments, okay? These towns. And notice they could not drive out the inhabitants of those cities. Well, why? They were too strong and everything. And the Manasseh and I wouldn't drive them out. Perhaps if Isaac and Asher had been doing it, they may have been driven out, but they weren't. So they just took that's what these countries, these three countries. They took the farmland around these cities. The Canaanites kept. Now notice when the children of Israel grew strong, later all of Israel starts imitate is comes where they're going to imitate this. Remember these they're going to put them under tribute again. Laziness and greed, but it's disobedience to God. And it's going to have consequences. And we'll see that as we go along. Now we continue on. Now we're going to look in Joshua. Oh, we're going to Judges, I'm sorry. Judges 1, verse 24 through 28. We're going to look at, again, examine this case about this man they made a covenant with that was not a covenant with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And here's what we read. The spies saw a man coming out of the city, and they said to him, show us, we pray you, the entrance of the city, and we will show you mercy. When he showed them the entrance of the city, they smote the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man go and all his family. And the man went to the land of the Hittites and built a city and called the name thereof Luz, which is the name thereof unto this day. There did Manasseh drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and her towns, nor Tanakh and her towns, or the inhabitants of Dor and her towns, the inhabitants of Ephraim and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Megiddo and her towns, but the Canaanites would dwell in that land. And it came to pass when Israel was strong, they put the Canaanites to tribute, but not only drive them out. Okay, so this thing we talked about a few minutes ago came about because of this covenant right here. It's part of that same thing. These spies were in Ephraim. Here's Bethel, Ephraim's territory, okay, right there on the edge of Benjamin, okay. And remember, these spies were supposed to find out where the entrance city was. And they took a shortcut by making this covenant with this man who plainly continued to worship the gods that no mention of, he doesn't become a worshiper of God like Rahab and the Gibeonites had. He just, there's just a shortcut for them to make taking this town easier. Well, then, but this has consequences. Manasseh could not drive them out. They took a shortcut, and it's going to have consequences. Well, Manasseh tried to take the towns that weren't theirs, and the Lord didn't help them, so they could do that. And again, this idea that Ephraim started, let's put them under tribute, so they're driving them out, money for nothing. They do the work, we get the money. Easier than doing farm work, easier than building up walls in the city and building up businesses and so on and so forth. They'll do the work, we'll get the money. But it wasn't God's plan. Well, this spreads, like it said, all of Israel. And here's some examples of this here in Judges 1 through 30. But here did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahalo. But the Canaanites dwelt among them and became tributaries. Okay, so here's Zebulun, little bitty Zebulun, didn't have much space, but it's perhaps a little bit more than what it shows in this map here we talked about before. But here's Mount of Moor where these three kind of meet. Now, Zebulun did not drive them out. Zebulun could have drove them out. These were not a case of too strong for them, the Manasseh and I not driving them out so they could be dealt with in another generation. They were supposed to be driving them out. The Manasseh and I had already done all the heavy lifting, but they said, let's make them tributaries. They give us money for nothing. Yeah, they'll get to stay on this land or in these cities, but they'll have to do all this work and give us the money. Now, in Judges 133, and Judges 1, verse 33, I should say, we read about this spreads, and perhaps to the worst example, this ideal that started in Ephraim. Neither the Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh, the inhabitants of Bethanath, but he dwelt among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land. Neither the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh nor Bethanath became tributary. Nevertheless, the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh and Bethanath became tributaries unto them. Okay, notice Naphtali. And remember, Naphtali's land here is all kind of mountainous. So it's sort of the West Virginia if we compare it to a U.S. state, okay? And they have this land. There's places they have ways to make money. But notice, they're outnumbered. They dwell among the Canaanites. And, you can kind of think of back in them days of American slavery, you have the plantation owner and his family, and one of these large plantations, say maybe they have, family were large, then let's say they had 20 people, but they have 400 slaves. The slaves outnumber them, but they're making money off those slaves. They're making money, they're benefiting financially from the slaves' labor. Well, it's the same thing here. They're upping their financial stand among the tribes by doing this. They potentially per person basis in Naphtali are going to become the richest. Are going to have the richest tribe members. At least that's their goal here. Because I've seen other tribes did it, nothing seems to have happened bad yet. So they say it's another level. Now, notice in Numbers 1, 34, 35, we'll read about one last group here. And the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, but not suffered to come down to the valley. But the Ammonites would dwell in Mount Erez in Aijalon and Shaalbeim. Yet the hand of Joseph prevailed, so they became tributaries. Okay, here's our Aijalon, and the other one's not shown here. But they're in the land of Dan. Well, Dan couldn't drive them out because we saw that this indicates they forced them into the mountains. The Melech the mountains of the highlands, the high ground. Dan's going to have a defendable place till that next generation can go down there. That's all good. However, they're dwelling in these other mountains, some smaller mountains there in Aijalon, in Shaalbeim. Now, however, notice Dan isn't the one that does it. The house of Joseph does this, and they become tributaries to them. This allotment does not belong. The house of Joseph is collectively Manasseh and Ephraim. It doesn't belong to them. They're continuing on their policy of going in there. And notice it said Issachar here. This entire land here, so let's go to Issachar. Dor belonged to Asher originally, as we saw. So this map's really wrong. Issachar should go here. Dor should go there. Manasseh just went and took the farmland around some of these cities. 3 different countries, remember, they're not connected. So this map's a little bit wrong. So you can think of Issachar here, Asher coming down this way, and have little dots with little circles, kind of like we talked about with Simeon, little polka dots with Manasseh. Well, they've done some little polka dots down here as well. In this case, they didn't take the land, but now these tributaries, these down here, are paying these 2 tribes, not Dan, whose territory they're in. So this entire system, they've made all these covenants with all these guys so they could get money for nothing. I mean, it's really being driven by laziness and greed. And you know what they saw? Perhaps a shortcut. God promised to make us wealthy. Man, that's going to take a while, some hard work. We can get wealthy right now with all the work. What could go wrong? Well, they turned to the left or the right, and God had warned them not to do so. Now, in Numbers 33, verse 53 through 55, we'll go back and we're going to go back and rehearse what could go wrong. Starting with, first of all, the testimony of Moses, this warning to him not to do what they just did. And you shall dispossess, Numbers 33 again, verse 53 to 56. You shall dispossess the inhabitants of the land and dwell therein, for I've given you the land to possess it. You shall divide the land by a lot inheritance among your families, and the more you shall give them more inheritance, the fewer shall give the less inheritance. Every man's inheritance shall be the place where his lot falls, according to the tribes your fathers shall inherit. If you will not drive out the inhabitants of the land before you, then it shall come to pass those which you let remain of them among shall be pricks in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and shall vex you in the land where you dwell. Moreover, it shall come to pass that I shall do unto you as I thought to do unto them. Remember, their parts dispossess them. God's given them the land. And notice, if you do not drive out the inhabitants of the land from before you, that's doing their part. Remember, they're not going to be all driven out in one generation, but the heavy lifting is going to be done in an area. They're to clear out the rest, drive out the rest of them in that area, set up farms, take over the farms, the cities, except grow their numbers, keep that population density out so more wild animals don't move in. So also provide security so the Canaanites don't attack them. And then the Canaanites are going to clear out wild animals, build new farms, etc. Then you're going to repeat process. Well, they didn't do that. But also notice this here. Every man's inheritance where his lot falls. According to the tribes your fathers shall inherit. That means the people of Ephraim, start with Ephraim and then Manasseh, primarily the house of Joseph, had no business going into other tribes' land and taking it because it was easier. They have totally disobeyed those instructions. And notice, they let them remain. Not the ones the Lord didn't drive out. He has no reason. We're going to look at a deeper reason for not driving them all out once. But we already mentioned one. But the ones you were supposed to drive out, you didn't. And you let them remain. Well, they did this so they could collect tribute from them. And notice, they're going to pricks in your eyes. You're going to cry. They're going to make you cry. Thorns in your side, a constant irritation. They're going to vex you. Vex you is Old English for cause you serious trouble, okay? They're going to vex you, cause you serious trouble in the land where you dwell. And just think about before the wall went up with Israel, with the West Bank, and there was an intifada during the second intifada, and there was a suicide bomber virtually every day. Somebody was crying from the loss of their children, except for these suicide bombers, because they were in there remaining among them. And it caused them to cry, it caused them continual discomfort, and caused them continual trouble. That's what God's saying. But it's worse than that. I'm going to do to you as I thought to do unto them. What I intend to do to the Canaanites? Drive them out of the land completely. It's supposed to be that term, the Holy Land, a land where only the worshipers of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob dwell in. A land that'd be a base for bringing the knowledge of the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to all other nations in due time. But he's not giving them this land so they can go do whatever they want. It's about his kingdom and his purposes. And he brought judgment on the Canaanites for wickedness. If they have the same wickedness, he says, I'm going to bring the same judgment on you. God is no respecter of persons. The Torah says he does not regard any man. The prophecy is no respecter of persons. When Shimon, Kepha, Peter, however you like, said, I perceive God's no respecter of persons, God hadn't changed. Peter's perspective changed. But God already said it twice before, then he wasn't. And that's what he's saying here as well, because he's not a respecter of persons. If you let them stand and start doing what they do, I'm going to drive you out as well. Now, in Joshua 23, verses in his His farewell speech before he dies, we read this reminder of this as well. The Lord has driven out before you great nations and strong. But for you, as for you, no man has been able to stand before you unto this day. One man of you shall chase 1,000. For the Lord your God, he it is that fights for you as he promised. Take heed, therefore, to yourselves that you love the Lord your God. Else, if you otherwise go back and cleave to the remnant of these nations, those that remain among you shall make marriage to them and go into them, and they to you. Know for certain that the Lord your God will no more drive out any of these nations from before you. They shall be snares and traps for you, and scourge in your sides, thorns in your sides, till you perish off this good land which the Lord God has given you. Remember, as we talked about, it's them or you, God had told them. Now, notice who's in this work of this point when Josh is up to that point where the land was divided in that 7 years of war. The Lord did the heavy lifting. He did the part they could not do. Now, the rest of them, no one can stand before them. So he's with them in two ways. And we'll see this, in Judges, how that works in more detail. We start our next series on the Judges, the wild days of the Judges, I call it. Now, one man of you is going to chase 1,000. Why? Because God's fighting for you. They're not afraid of you. They're afraid of who's behind you. It's like you have a little kid in school, and maybe the smallest in his class, but he's got this big, huge brother, and he's standing behind him. There ain't a kid in this class that's going to pick a fight with him. God's fighting for you. They mess with you, they're going to mess with God, and he's going to take them out. And remember, through God is through the Melech Adonai, the angel of the Lord. So you got to take heed. Take heed. You have to watch, like working out your salvation with fear and trembling. Same ideal here. You got to be on constant guard that you love the Lord your God, that you don't let yourself get taken in by something that's suggesting the enemy that seems like the easy way. It seems like, hey, I can get the benefits now with a lot less effort. But if you go back on what you promised, and you cleave. Remember, you're not supposed to have anything to do with them. Even the ones that he left among them, they have nothing to do with them. So you're not eating with them and eating things offered to idols, not getting marriages with them. Then God, if you do that, Joshua warns them, God's not going to drive out these nations anymore. The Melech Adonai is not going to drive them out. They're too big for you to drive out, too big and strong, too many of them. They're going to cause you trouble, and eventually you're going to perish off the land. Because as we said, it's them or you. And if you don't get rid of them, they are going to get rid of you. Because the Lord's not going to help you with them anymore. The angel of the Lord's not. Now we see this. Now we see what happens as a result of these warnings that were ignored in Judges 2, verses 1 through 5. And the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I made you go out of Egypt, and I brought you into the land I swore to your fathers, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And you shall make no league with the inhabitants of the land. You shall throw down their altars, but you have not obeyed my voice. Why have you done this? Therefore I said, I will not drive them out from before you. They shall be thorns in your sides, and their God shall be a snare unto you. It shall come to pass, the angel of the Lord spoke these words unto all the children of Israel. People lifted their voices and wept. And they called that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto the Lord. Okay, remember Gilgal, the mound of the foreskin, the place where they first crossed the Jordan River, where they made a covenant with God and promised to fall in that Joshua generation. Bochim means weepings. Because why? They're weeping. And we're going to look at exactly when we're going to get a better idea of when this occurs here in a moment. But they made this happen. They kept doing this. You'll make no league. Well, they made a league when they made those when they had put them under when they put them under tribute. And when they put them under tribute, they let them keep their altars. They didn't throw them down. Now, so the Lord's leaving them. Now, is this his fault? No, it's their fault. I will never break my covenant with you. He didn't break his covenant with them. They broke it. They broke it with him. And he said in the covenant, if you don't do your part, I'm not going to do mine. And it's that way with every single covenant in the Word of God. It's that way with every single promise. Anyone that tells you you can get the benefits without meeting the conditions is a deceiver and a liar. As it says in 1 Corinthians 6, 9, and 10. Do not be deceived. Those who do these things, it lists a bunch of things off. Fornication, which is having sex outside of marriage. Drinking, being involved in drug use. And a number of worshiping idols, obviously, and a number of other things, will not inherit the kingdom of God. Anyone that tells you you can get the benefits of the covenant without doing your part is a liar. But God's not a liar. God says he'll draw nearer to you if you draw near to him. You'll spend time with him in prayer and do your best to walk in his ways. But if you treat him with casualness, he also says he'll treat you with casualness. He didn't break his covenant with them. They didn't keep up their end of the deal. And he told them, if you don't, that's part of the deal. If you don't, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to drive him out. And he's good to his word. We can trust God. He's faithful to do what he says he'll do, good or bad. Or we think it's good or bad. He is faithful to do it. He is faithful at all times. But sometimes those who call themselves his children are not. Now we're going to rehearsal the matter of this matter. It started off with after Joshua divided the land. It's like what's called a parenthetical passage. It's not. It's going to give us a flashback. It's going to start with a flashback here, starting with earlier, how they get in this mess in Bochim. How they get to this point. And here's what we read. And Joshua let the people go. Heal Israel, every man in his heritage, possess the land. The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders that lived Joshua had seen the great works of the Lord they did for Israel. And Joshua, the servant of the Lord, died, being 110 years old. And they buried him in the border of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the Mount Ephraim, on the north side of the hill Gaash. Also, all that generation were gathered unto their fathers, and there arose another generation after them which knew not the Lord, yet the works that the Lord had done for Israel. Okay, here's our first thing. So, from the time Joshua divided the land, till not just he died at 110, however long that was, like we said, we haven't figured out, there's no way to fix that time that I've been able to find so far. But all the elders that lived Joshua, remember he was 40 years old when he went to Kadesh Barnea, and 38 more years, and he went over the promise, and 85 when he died. 25 more years have gone by. Well, the youngest one of those people who came in with him was 20. They'd only be 45 years old, okay? They're only 45 years old at the youngest ones. When he dies, they're going to outlive him by quite a bit. They're going to become the elders of the generations that did. So these elders that came in with him all did this. Now that whole Joshua generations gathered, who really had one really large failing, and that was at Baal Peor, where they did exactly the things that we've been warned about today about going a whoring after their gods. Some of them died over there, but that was it for them. They were the most degree faithful, but as they got older and they had to let that next generation start taking care of things, the next generation has other plans as soon as they're in charge, things are going to change. And this generation didn't know the Lord, the works he had done for Israel. Remember, this older generation, the ones that were I say 57, had been in Egypt. They were 17 when they left Egypt. Okay, but they came into the land. They were 17 when they left Egypt. They had known everything God had done. And Joshua was perhaps a little older than them, but they had known everything God had done from the Exodus all the way to the dividing of the land and so on and so. But this next generation had none of this. Their children after were born after they started coming into the land, particularly after the land was settled. More to the point, knew nothing. After those 85 years were over, they didn't know a darn thing. Okay, Josh turned 85. All right, those 25 years. Now, when they get in charge, that generation who did not go with Joshua, who had not seen what God had done, here's what they did. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Baalim. They forsook the Lord God of their fathers, which brought them out of the land of Egypt, and followed their gods, of the gods of the people around about them, and bowed themselves unto them, and provoked the Lord to anger. They forsook the Lord and served Baal and Asheroth. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he delivered them into the hands of the spoilers that spoiled them, and sold them into the hands of their enemies round about, so they could no longer stand before their enemies. Whithersoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was hot against them, was against them for evil. The Lord said, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were greatly distressed. I made a little error a moment ago, my math there. Joshua was 38 years after that, and Joshua 32 more years. The youngest one, Joshua was 7 years in the war and 25 years after. So the youngest one was 52 years old when Joshua died. Okay, we don't know how long they lived, but let's say reasonably another 20 years at least, and they'd only be 72. And we've seen Joshua 110, perhaps another 40 years afterwards. But whatever it was, this other generation, they did these things, put these guys under tribute, did not get rid of their idols, so on and so forth, and started worshiping as God had said. And that's what brought them, that's what caused the Melech Adonai, the angel of the Lord, to depart. They forsook God to serve, notice, Baal and Ashtaroth. Baal is Baalim is multiple Baals, literally lords, okay? Baal is also the word for husband, by the way. Because since the husband of Ashtaroth is the same, is the Canaanite equivalent of Ishtar in Egyptian, Easter in Germanic tribe, Osira, where we get the word estrogen from in Greek mythology. Esther over in the area of Persia. Okay, God's fertility and their husband. These are the chief god and goddesses. There's a bunch of them. They have a whole pantheon, as it were. But the Lord, they forsook them and served them. Through that very process, they ate. They left the place of worship. They left the idol worshippers there. They ate food offered to idols when they call them to eat with them. Perhaps close business deals or whatever. Made marriages with them, and start doing this. So now the anger of the Lord is hot against them. And what's the first thing he does? He delivered them to the hands of spoilers. The Melech Adonai is not around anymore. They're no longer afraid to attack Israel. They saw Israel as weak compared to before. And thus the Lord sold them into the hands of their enemies round about. And they can no longer stand before their enemies. Now, this should remind us of modern times. On October 6th, Israel was weak and divided. They held these protests for doing this. People wanting to do the exact things that God told Israel he was driving the Canaanites out of the land for, and Israel was not to follow in doing. Homosexuality, gender bit nonsense. Um, People refuse, and remember, people refuse to show up to their guard duty, to show up in the reserves. Over a third of them didn't show up. They left the borders undefended. And the Lord was not with them. His anger was hot against them. It was hot against Israel now, just like it was then. In modern times, just like it was in ancient times. What happened? The spoilers spoiled them. Hamas came over and spoiled them, stole their stuff, burnt their homes, raped their wives, killed their children, took them captives, sold them into the hands, took them captives, okay, roundabout. They could not stand before their enemies. Israel, emboldened other people to attack. So the Lord was against them for evils, he said. Just as now, as then, is now. Kind of gives you the ideal of what's going on, how the easy route, this ideal, hey, they'll work, we'll get the money. We want to go through the work of driving them out. We want to go through the work of killing them. We want to go through the work of rebuilding cities. We want to go through the work of working the farms. They'll do the work, we'll get the money. This scheme has totally went bad for them. It caused the angel of the Lord to leave them. The protection of God's no longer on them, and their enemies were emboldened, just as we saw in modern times. Now, in Judges 2, 16 through 19, read the following. Nevertheless, the Lord raised up judges who delivered them out of the hand of them that spoiled them, of those that spoiled them. They would not hearken to the judges, but they went a whoring after their gods and bow themselves to them. They quickly turned out of the way which their fathers walked, obeying the commandments of the Lord. But they did not do so. But they did not so. When the Lord raised them up judges, and the Lord was the judge and delivered them, was with the judge and delivered them out of the hand of their enemies all day, the days of the judge. For I repented the Lord because of their groanings by reason that oppressed them and vexed them. And it came to pass when the judge was dead, they returned and corrupt themselves more than their fathers, and followed their gods to serve them and bow down to them. They ceased not from their own doings, nor from their own stubborn way. Okay. Now, remember, we first went, how did we get in this mess? What led up to these events, this behavior? Here's the consequences of the Bokim, the place of weepings, the Melech lies on with them, and what that causes. Okay. Now into the future, God's not abandoning them. Is not abandoning them completely. Notice he raised up judges. Now listen, they wouldn't listen to the judges. Well, gee, so that'd be a surprise they didn't listen to Moses, huh? But they went a whoring and turned quickly out of the way which their fathers walked in, particularly talking about that Joshua generation who was obeying the commandments of the Lord for the most part. So the Lord is with the judge, and he delivered him out of the hands of the enemy all the days of the judge. All that judge was in this mode of deliver, a deliverer like Moses. Then they would do this because the Lord couldn't let them. He repented him. What it means here is he had heard their groanings just like he had in Egypt, but he remembered, and why I said about Egypt, he remembered his come with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when they groaned. He remembered that so he's got to keep his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob because they kept their end, and he's faithful now to keep his end. And the covenant was concerning their descendants. So he's got to deliver them somehow, or they're going to be wiped off the face of the earth. So he's got this judge thing. But notice, as soon as the judge is dead, they do more so than the previous generation did, more than their fathers. You see another judge to bow down. They cease not from their own doings, nor from their stubborn way. I mean, they're persistent. As long as the judge is there, they back off from that behavior, maybe a lot. We'll look at why. He's dead. they are worse than the previous generation or before the judge ever rose. Okay. Now we're going to explain this, remind you about these judges. Because these judges, it's the same Hebrew word here that we're going to see here, like relate to this verb, okay? It's judge. And we're going to see about this judge. It's not just deliver. It's like Moses, deliver, but it's not the judge's main function. And this is why we'll explain why they slack off on the bad behavior during the day of the judges while the judge is in office. And here we read in Exodus 18, verse 19 through 23. This is the words of Jethro, priest of Midian, a son of Abraham. He's a priest of God Most High, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is what he says about that. In this way, he says that God's saying to Moses through him, through Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, hearken now to my voice, and I'll give you counsel. God shall be with you, for you be with you for the people to Godward, that you may bring the cause unto God. You shall teach them statutes and laws, and thou shalt show them the way they must walk, where they must walk, and the work they must do. Moreover, you shall provide out of all the people able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness, and place such over them to be rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties and hundreds, and rulers of tens. Let them judge people of all seasons. It shall be that every great matter they shall bring unto you, with small matter they shall judge. So be easy of yourself, and they shall bear the burden with you. You shall do this thing, and God command you so, to be able to endure, and all people shall go to their place in peace. Okay, I want you to notice this here. Some things here. And God's going to be with you. He's going to give him counsel. This counsel's from God. So notice God commands you, okay? You're going to go to God and ask him and ask for wisdom from him for the cases that aren't easy to decide, okay? You're going to teach these other judges, the people, what the laws are, so people know what they're supposed to be doing. Not just what the laws are to the letter, but show them how they must walk, how to keep those laws as God intended, which is often a serious problem. People will cite some law and they turn to the left or side, and they sort of twist it, not to do what God intended, but to get some benefit they perceive. Again, laziness and greed, looking for a shortcut. And the work they must do. Okay, there's work. You've got to do some work. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Remember the words of Shaul, the Apostle Paul. God will judge every man according to his work, according to my gospel. Shaul, the Apostle Paul says. So, the gospel says we must work. Our faith without works is dead. You got to show them what work they must do to show they have this faith. Now, you're going to provide some lower judges. Notice the qualification. They got to fear God, not men. Men of truth. Men who don't go around, you don't want a bunch of liars. Hating covetous. People who won't take bribes. Judges must be subject to neither bribery nor intimidation according to the word of God, which is a big problem we often have. We got judges that are subject to those things, here in the U.S. and other places as well. Now, you're going to place them, and notice the hierarchy. The smallest one's 10, 50, 100, thousands. Okay, perhaps there are ones, and perhaps even sort of maybe an appeal process in some cases to go up. The 10 guy can go to the 50, the 50 to the hundreds, and so on and so forth. And look, you're going to let them judge it all seasons. Okay, all seasons. Now, Moses is no points to free up some of his time. He's not going to be judging it all seasons. He's going to have a court session, just like the U.S. Supreme Court, a session, and these matters are going to wait for then. The ones they can settle, they're going to settle. They're going to settle. But the great ones are going to bring to him when his court's in session. Remember, the judge, Moses, also the deliverer, and we see him doing various things at various times. He can't be in session every day, which is what he's been doing all day. So God commanded him to do this. This is speaking through Jethro. Now we're looking at Moses' response in Exodus 18, verse 24 to 26. Here's what we read. So Moses hearkened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. Moses chose able men out of all Israel and made them heads over the people, rulers of thousands, rulers of hundreds, rulers of fifties, and rulers of tens. And they judged the people of all seasons. The hard case they brought to Moses, with every small matter they judged themselves. Again, remember, Moses has access to God, is going to be able to go to God if he doesn't know himself, okay, and get wisdom from God. So they judge themselves. So Moses puts this thing in place. But the judge system doesn't end with Moses. In fact, in Deuteronomy 17, where the law of the king is, this system's to continue till they have a king who will then do that as part of his duties. And here's the details of this law of the judge to continue this on. And as we saw, Joshua and then Caleb were judges. The torch has to be passed every generation. You're always going to need someone in this office. They may not always be acting as the deliverer, but you're going to need them in the office. Now, here's what it says. They shall come to the judges, to the priests and Levites, those people who have a hard case, and to the judge shall be in those days, and they inquire, and they shall show you the sentence of judgment. And they shall do according to the sentence, the place which the Lord shall shall he show you. You shall do to observe do according to all they inform you. According to the sense of the law, which they teach you, according to the judgment which they shall tell you, you shall do. You shall not decline from the sins which they show you, to the right and to the left. And the man that will do presumptuously and not hearken to the priest and stand submissive before the Lord, thy God, or to the judge, even that man shall die. And you shall put away evil from Israel. Okay. So, they're going to inquire. They're going to inquire of the Lord. Is what that means. The priest and the judge. Okay, if it was one they, these harder cases, perhaps even too hard for them, and the Lord's going to give them a sentence. And notice where they're to do this at. The place the Lord's going to show to choose. Well, that'll be the temple eventually, as we discussed with Messiah in the temple. How that's why they're upset with him for teaching the law in the temple. It's showing he was judge. He was the judge. They even said that. Who made you judge? Who gave you this authority? Well, and now they're going to, whatever they say is law. Sins of the law which they shall teach you, the judgment they tell you of. You're going to do it. You're not going to decline. You can't go to the left or right. No modifying. You got to do what they say and exactly what they say. And if someone decides to do something different, go to the left or right, doesn't do what they were told, the penalty is death. And why? To put away evil from Israel. Because it's ultimately God given the judgment. And when they rebel, when they despise the manna, the word of God given to the judge, it brings death, just like when they despise the manna, it brought death, and the brass serpent had to be raised, the fiery serpents. Okay, so the system of the judge is to continue on to the time of the king. So the judge is not just delivering and then going back to farming or doing whatever. He's in session in the temple, which will be at the tabernacle first, which will be in Shiloh, and in the temple later. And he's going to inquire from God get God's word on if he's not sure. Him and the priest are going to pray, inquire, and God himself is ultimately going to be acting as judge of Israel to this human judge. Just as he was in the flesh as a human when Messiah walked on the earth. Now in Judges 20, We'll wrap up here with Judges 20 through 22. We'll read about about how this starts coming to pass for these judges. Sets them up for the need for a judge. The anger of the Lord is hot against Israel. He says, because the people have transgressed my covenant, which I command your fathers hearken not to my voice, I will also not drive out before them the nations which Joshua left when he died, that through them I may prove Israel to keep the way of the Lord to walk therein, as their fathers did keep it or not. Therefore the Lord left those nations. I'll drive them out hastily, and he delivered them into the hand of Joshua. You notice he delivered them into the hand of Joshua. Joshua didn't do anything wrong. Okay. He didn't drive them out for the reason he said, but also to prove Israel. Well, that Joshua generation pretty much kind of passed the test, but the next generation did not. And notice, which Joshua left at when he died, because the next round hadn't started yet. So perhaps the population, or maybe it never was going to get high enough because they weren't following the instructions. They weren't staying in their own land and weren't clearing out the people that they could clear out and and settle in the land and growing that population density in that right angle shaped line piece of land that already conquered. I showed you. So he's not going to drive them out because at Bokeem's where he's saying this. Okay, they transgressed his covenant. Remember, that's that generation that didn't know Joshua. It was after Joshua died, and the elders that outlived Joshua. And again, remember the youngest one would have been 52 when Joshua died. I'm sorry, 52. Yeah, when Joshua died. So we don't know how far that went, but maybe say 40 more years, perhaps. In Judges 1 through 3, we start reading about this process that God has and see how Israel does. It's a sure whether or not they're going to, obey God's commandments or not, or perhaps, well, let's just read the results. Now, these are the nations the Lord left to prove Israel by them, even as many of Israel as had not known all the wars of Canaan. Only that generation of the children of Israel might know to teach them war, at least such as knew nothing thereof, namely the five lords of the Philistines, all the Canaanites, all the Sidonians, the Hivites that dwell in Mount Lebanon, from Baal Hermon and to the entering of Hamath. They were to prove Israel by them, and they were at that heart of the commandments of the Lord, which he commanded their fathers by the hand of Moses. Okay, notice, remember they went up to Hermon, but the land actually went north of that quite a bit to Hamath, okay, which is the gates of Hamath, the entering of Homs, the city in Syria today, but its problem is still called Hamath, and the border there. So, up a little further north, perhaps 10, 20 miles, there's some people, the Hivites dwelling up there, okay? In the mountains, they have the high ground, the advantage, and can come down and raid, okay? So you got the Philistines and the Sidonians, of course, over in Sidon, which weren't related to the Canaanites at all. They were actually from, called the Phoenicians. Phoenicia was the capital of Crete, on the western end of Crete, and as their habit was, like we saw the guy when they showed him how to get into Luz, and he went and built another city called Luz. They named it Philiki after the Phoenicians. Okay, that's where the Sidonians came from. They're not related to the Canaanites. Okay, the Hivites in their group as well. So they are going to sit there, and the whole point's to prove that they're going to walk in these commandments, but also leaving some so they can continue to know war, to teach them war. Okay, because they didn't know anything of it. So now it's going to create a need for continual teaching of war, teaching how to fight. I mean, look, if everyone would just leave everyone alone, we could get rid of all of our armies, all of them, But they have Army, Navy, Marines, Air Force. None of it, Israel could totally get rid of the IDF and so on and so forth. But that's not reality. So they're going to have to remember, because they're going to have to fight later to take the next swath, was the plan, the next patch, the next bit of land. Until generation to generation, they possessed all of it. So they got to learn. He's going to keep them there also, so they don't forget how to fight. Now, we wrap up here with Numbers 3, 5 through 7. Now we look at how Israel responded to this test. The children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites. And the children of Israel dwelt among the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Okay, I guess the Hivites did come out of the Canaanites. Okay. They took their daughters to be their wives, and gave their daughters to their sons, and served their gods. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and forgot the Lord their God, and served Baalim and their groves. Oh, we had seen this before. Okay, now we're caught up again. A summary. Why God left them? To test them. That's the other reason he left them. Would they walk in his ways? Also, so they wouldn't forget how to fight. How they respond to the test? Epic failure. Okay. Epic failure. Notice they dwelt among the Canaanites. They're outnumbered by these people now. They don't have that big older brother protecting them anymore, the Melech Adonai. Well, they do have protection in the form of the judge, and that's what we're going to look at in our next series, the wild days of the judges. But they start marrying into them, and vice versa. They're becoming one people, instead of a people set apart to God from all their nations. Now, their marriage would be okay if these people became worshipers of God. The men got circumcised in particular. They started keeping and got grafted into Israel, but they didn't. They're serving other gods. They're drawn to serving other gods. And now they're going and serving Baalim and their groves. And this is what's going to cause the wild days of the judges. We're going to look at our next series. Now, your big takeaway from this today should be this. Don't turn to the left or the right from what God says. He means what he says and says what he means. There are no shortcuts, no easy way out. You're not, you may look like for a while, hey, this is money for nothing. I'm better off than I would have been if I obeyed God. But it is short term. It will come back on you. If you treat him with casualness, he's going to treat you with casualness. It's never a matter of him abandoning you. It's you abandoning him. But if you draw near to him, even after you've done that and repent and draw near to him, he'll draw near back to you. So do it God's way, all the way, every day. And you'll be so much better off in the long run. His plans work because they're his plans. That's all I've got for this week. Until next week, shalom.